Hello, and welcome to the first edition of the Virtual Professor. I'm Dr. Maxine Bryant, and I am your instructor for this series. If you missed my preview, if you will, the Virtual Professor is a series of very short 15-minute clips of lessons around social justice, criminal justice, and issues around inequality and inequity in those particular systems. Many times we're going to discuss contemporary issues that are going on in our country currently. So with this first session, I thought it would be good for me to lay a foundation about the criminal justice system in particular, particularly for those of you who are not familiar with it. Now, the criminal justice system is known to have three primary components: police, which is the entryway into the system, or law enforcement; the court; and corrections. Now, I've added a fourth component, and I call that reentry, because even though reentry is technically a part of corrections, it has a life of its own. It has some particular parts to it that are unique from what we can traditionally consider to be corrections, because it can be out in the community. Many times people are engaged in house arrest or community services, or a number of things that are out in the community. So I wanted to include that fourth component and make it a little bit different than what we traditionally think about when we think of jails and prisons. Now, I do want to clarify the difference between jails and prisons. Jails are short-term places of incarceration. If a person has been convicted of a misdemeanor or a low-level felony, they may be sentenced to a jail for up to 1 year. Now, some of you may be saying, well, I know people who've been in jail 2 and 3 years. That's because they couldn't make bail, and they were in jail as a holding place for them until such a time that their case went to trial. Once sentenced, a person should not serve more than a year in a jail setting, right? Now, it is true that some people fall through the hole. That should not happen. If a person is convicted of a felony and is sentenced to 366 days or more, they are generally sentenced to prison. So there's a difference. A lot of times in our community, on TV and other places, you see the two words used interchangeably. They're not the same. They really have two different purposes. So that's your overview of the system. Now, there are some books that I recommend that you read. The first one, many of you are aware of, is The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. Excellent read. Michelle does a great job laying the foundation for how the disparities, particularly the racial disparities in our country around the criminal justice system, how they started and why they exist and how deep they run. So I recommend that, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. I also recommend a documentary that you can download on any Netflix channel if you are a Netflix subscriber. It's the 13th documentary by Ava DuVernay. Now, Miss DuVernay does an awesome job really uncovering layer after layer after layer after layer about the 13th Amendment, which if you took any history class or African American studies class, you know the 13th Amendment is known to have freed the slaves, but there's a loophole in that. No one can be held as an enslaved person except for punishment of a conviction. Loophole. And so that paved the way for chain gangs to coming up with various ways to continue to enslave freed slaves. Even now, when we look at the prison industrial system and privatized prisons and all of that, we see the impact and the consequences of the 13th Amendment. I highly recommend that. Now, a book that I came across by Shane Bauer is called Americans' Prisons. Shane Bauer is a white journalist who goes undercover as a correctional officer in a federal private prison in Louisiana. and he uncovers some stuff that will make your hair stand up on your head. Oh my goodness. And he's telling it from the perspective of a person who just wanted to know. And he talks about the people that he met, the experiences that he had, all of the inequities that he saw and experienced in terms of what he observed. Oh my goodness, it's really a good, captivating book. So I recommend that. Wow, a young Hispanic woman by the name of Nicole Gonzalez Van Cleve went to law school to become an attorney and decided she was up in Chicago, to do some graduate work interning at the Cook County Jail, Cook County criminal justice really system. And she writes in her book, she entitled her book, Cook County. That should tell you something. You see, Nicole could really pass for white, and many of her colleagues believed that she was. And so she got another perspective of how the county courts work up in Cook County in Illinois. Eye-opening, amazing, the disparities that were so obvious that many people are oblivious to. I recommend that book. I think that's it for right now in terms of what I would recommend as we continue to lay down this foundation. I will let you know that our criminal justice system is in grave need of reform. And it's not like the United States is not aware of reform, from the way we operate in our policing, the way our courts are run, and definitely as it relates to corrections. So let me piggyback for a moment about corrections. Now, in the United States, we have a very punitive perspective around corrections. We want to punish people. We want to make them hurt. And even after they've done their time, we want to continue to still punish them. And so there is the term called collateral consequences. That's that ongoing type of punishment that continues. If you've been convicted of a drug offense, you cannot get food stamps. You may not be able to live in public housing. There's so many things that you cannot do. That's a collateral consequence. Even if you've not been convicted of a drug offense, if you just have been convicted, in many states, you cannot vote. And I'm going to go into more of that because we need to fight those type of policies that really hinder equality in our country. We are supposed to be a democracy where every voice is heard, but we have systemic ways of silencing certain voices. And the more informed we are, the more we can fight against those type of injustices. Now, that's the prison system. Now, let me say one other thing about the American prison system. Now, I mentioned earlier that it's very punitive. There are so many other countries in our world that do not approach punishment with such a punitive perspective. For example, in Sweden, and I know the Sweden culture is very different from our capitalistic culture in the United States, but hear me, they have a very low recidivism rate. Now, recidivism is the rate at which people return back to prison by either committing a new crime or violating a condition of their release. So in Sweden, the way they do prisons is so much more humane. Their prison cells look more like college dorms. People can wear their street clothes. They're treated in a very humane way. And the punishment, here's the philosophy, the punishment is seen as being separated from family and friends. And so because of that, how they treat their prisoners is worlds different from what we do. We feel the punishment is not only separating people from family and from friends, but also making them hurt, giving them the bare minimums. And I know you've heard a lot of things about people going to prison to get away from bad situations, living quarters, or not having any home, and so they commit a crime so they can become incarcerated. That happens very seldom. It does happen, but it's not the kind of occurrence that with any frequency that many times we're led to believe. Even our federal prisons is not a place that you just want to go to if you are in your right mind. It's not a place you just run to and say, hey, I'm going to get 3 square meals and I'm going to have a bed to live in or to sleep in and I'm going to get better treatment. Don't believe the hype. And there are many people who will purport that that is not necessarily true. Because we are a capitalistic system, there's a hierarchy of who's who. And believe me, the top of the hierarchy in the American prison system is very wealthy, right? They make money. They make a major profit off of the backs of people. Sounds like slavery to me. But at any rate, Sweden is a socialism kind of country. And so their perspective about equalization is totally different. I recognize that. That's our prison system that needs to be reformed. How we do our courts needs to be reformed. Think about it. Our juries are selected from 12 lay people who are not supposed to be very knowledgeable about the law, yet they're making decisions about a person's guilt or innocence based on legal matters. So they sit in a courtroom for however long the trial lasts. They're listening to legal jargon. They're trying to make sense of evidence. They don't know what's right. The judge will say, disregard this, or okay, you can say that. Attorneys are objecting. You got a lot going on, a lot of information that's new. And we're asking 12 people to decide the fate of an individual. Did you know that because of the inequalities in our system, first of all, many people are exonerated through various innocence projects around our country. And the majority of those people who are exonerated are people of color, particularly Black people, because of the inequities in our country. So that's another thing that we will talk about in a future session. Now, when it comes to policing, everybody is very much aware of our trigger-happy police around the country. And they tend to be unequally trigger-happy for people of color, right? And you know the examples. You've heard of them. You know about them. You know about Mike Garner, who was died from a chokehold in Eric Garner, I'm sorry, who died from a chokehold in New York. You know about Philando Castile, who was killed, shot point blank, because he told the officer, I got a gun on me, not reaching for it, reaching for my wallet, and now he's gone. Freddie Gray, numbers of people, and we're going to talk about each of those people who have died at the hands of law enforcement for just being Black. Right here in Savannah, not too long ago, about a week earlier this year, there was a young man who was falsely arrested, held in jail for 23 days because he was in a photo lineup that he never should have been in, because the police knew that he wasn't a suspect, yet he was identified by the victim, erroneously so. We're going to talk about all of that and how that matters in our criminal justice system and what you can do about it. So for our next session, I invite you to tune in. There's a box underneath this video that gives you all the information that you need to get in contact with me and to leave your questions so that we can address them at the next session. For now, take care, have a good day, and we'll talk to you soon.